On the line with us, our old buddy, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. His most recent, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, also available as an ebook. rdwolf.com, democracyatwork.info, Prof. Wolff with 2 Fs on Twitter. Professor Wolff, welcome back, and Happy New Year to you. This morning, the White House, I think he was the deputy economic advisor, was on television talking about how the North American, in the United States, the meat processing industry, 85% of the industry is controlled by 4 companies. And their profits are up massively right now. And everybody's complaining about the increase in the price of meat, or at least all those people who eat meat, and blaming Joe Biden and the Democrats for it. Monopoly seems to be driving inflation pretty aggressively. I'm curious your thoughts on this and how we should address this and where this all might go.
Sure. And first of all, Happy New Year to you, Thom. It is a pleasure working with you. And I know I express the feelings of all your listeners and viewers that we're grateful that you're there and that you keep doing what you've done so well for so long.
Thank you.
Having said all that, let me make it really clear to get to the core of it. Capitalism is an economic system in which companies, as we well know, compete with one another. That's what we read in the books, and that's true as far as it goes. What isn't spoken about is the fact that one of the things that companies typically compete over sooner or later as they grow is what we call market share. The companies want to have a bigger market share until they are one of either a tiny number, and we call that an oligopoly, or they're the only one left standing, and we call it a monopoly. And the reasons companies always want to get to that point is because if you're one of a few or if you're the only one, you can charge more than you could when you had to fear competitors retaliating against you if you raised your price and they chose not to. And when you have only a few, like the 4 that dominate the meat processing industry, well, then you can jack up your prices, contribute to the inflation, and make a lot of money in the process, which is why capitalists do that. The only thing that's bizarre here in these stories is that anybody in their right mind who knows American history, where we have seen this literally innumerable times, would want to blame it on this or that president, this or that political party. All of these fellows, and women too, insofar as they're involved, have been watching this process their entire lives. Certainly Mr. Trump did, certainly Mr. Obama did, and certainly Mr. Biden did. Do relatively little about it. Now that they're in the hot seat for inflation, they're decided, this issue, which has generated, antitrust movements in this country for at least a century and a half, is once again on the agenda, but it looks for all the world like a temporary political ploy. Because if you really wanted to do something about monopolies and how they do indeed jack up prices whenever they can, why in the world would you start with the meat industry when there are plenty of examples that have had a much greater impact on the inflation we have? The tiny number of companies and countries that control the oil and gas business, the tiny number of companies that control telecommunications in the world, these are much more likely targets for the monopoly discussion and for the reintroduction of antitrust and anti-monopoly legislation, even though the record of that legislation working leaves a great deal to be desired.
Yeah, I think my guess is that the reason why the administration is singling out meat is because Fox News has been pounding on this for weeks now. Meat is something that most families confront the price of on a regular basis, as they buy it for food. and some of these, your cell phone bill going up, it seems like it's just constantly creeping up, and they're figuring out new ways to add charges and things. But my guess is that that's where it's coming from. But yeah, my recollection is it was mid-year 1983 that Ronald Reagan directed the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission to stop enforcing the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act, and the Antitrust Act of 1956. No president since then has seriously done that. The last major effort was when Richard Nixon initiated the breakup of AT&T, which resolved itself under Jimmy Carter. Do you think that do we need to come up with a whole brand new set of laws, or is it really just a matter of reversing Reagan's 1983 decision and saying, we're going to start enforcing these laws because they are fairly broad? I mean, the laws themselves don't specify market share or percentage or number of companies, so they're up to the interpretation of the regulators.
There's no question there's an interpretation, and the breadth of these laws was written intentionally to keep it open to the discretion of successive Supreme Courts, successive Congresses, successive executive branches. But the reality is that breadth has been used overwhelmingly to look the other way. And there's no surprise the monopolist who achieves being one of a handful or being the only producer is thereby able to make a ton of money, and they're not so stupid as to not realize that one of the things they better do with the extra monopoly gains they get is to make sure that the political system, which could hypothetically come in and disturb their monopoly, chooses in its discretion either not to do so, or to do so with loopholes, or to do so at a place which would make a snail win the latest foot race, et cetera, et cetera. That's what we've seen. That's the way this economy works. It's the way it has worked for a long time. And even when a particular president or a particular political leader finds it expedient to speak a good line about monopoly or to initiate a legal procedure, the larger picture is one of the Clayton Act in 1914, the Sherman Act back in 1890, are mostly dead letters. They do not alter the fundamental thrust of our capitalist system, which is an incentive structure to get every company hoping for, dreaming for, and maneuvering to get precisely the monopoly status that these laws suggest are not wanted in terms of what the society needs.
Yeah, just very quickly, given that we appear to be having around 5 or 6% inflation this year, what's your sense of how you would slice that out? I mean, what percentage of that is attributable to monopoly? What percentage of it is just a hiccup in supply chains? What percentage of it is the result of any change in our money supply, monetary policy?
I think all of the ones you mentioned play a role, but that role has been exaggerated in favor of not looking at another one, and that's the following. We've just come through a depression. We've just come through the worst public health disaster in a century. A lot of companies, not all, but a lot of companies weren't able to make their usual profits. They waited out 2020. They waited out 2021. They have now become determined to make up cost. Raising prices, which is what employers have the exclusive opportunity to do, is something whose time has come for them. And they're doing it to make more profits, to compensate for those that they lost, and that ought to be put squarely in the middle rather than looking for every other contributing factor.
Bingo. Professor Richard Wolff, it's always great talking with you, sir. Thank you so much for the great work that you do every day and for coming on our program. It's great having you with us.